tool, but I'm still learning it. So this is a very bare bones, black on white, boring presentation to some degree. So apologies for the death by PowerPoint. But today I want to talk a little bit about a website that I find really, really useful when analyzing data and thinking about ways to visualize your data. Like, I am someone who tends to go to the plain old, tried and tested bar plots for everything. If I can bar plot it, I'm going to bar plot it because I just find it's the simplest thing to use, but it tends to be quite boring or repetitive if it's the same visualization you're using over and over again. So the Data to Viz website has sort of helped me try and explore different ways of visualizing. It's a website that basically helps users make informed decisions about what type of visualization they might use based on what data they're actually trying to visualize. It has sort of a bit of a decision tree that helps you sort of look at, well, what type of data have I got? How many points do I have to sort of map out? Here are some different options that I could explore for visualizing. I've got a link here in my slides, but if you just did a Google for sort of data to Viz, you will find this page. But basically, you can sort of scroll down here, and this is the part that I really find useful from the Data to Viz website, because it's got these categories. So I can sort of just look at my data and go, well, is it mostly numbers, or is it sort of text and categories, or is it a mix of both numbers and categories? And by selecting these different things, it just then gives me this decision tree. So I'm looking at the numeric visualizations that are available, and then it's letting me look at, well, do I have just one variable that I'm trying to actually visualize? Or is there two variables that I'm trying to visualize? And then it just suggests different types of plots that I might find useful. So for instance, if I just had one set of numbers, just a column of numbers in my data set, I might look at using a histogram or a density plot. What I find really useful about this is I can actually explore a bit further. So I'm going to keep to my slideshow a little bit here. And I've determined that I have categoric data. I have one column of categoric data, so it's usually text, not numbers. And I'm going to go to my tried and true bar plot. All right. What the Data to Viz website does is, once you've sort of made that decision about what plot you'd like to explore, is it then helps you make that bar plot in R or Python or JavaScript. So there's information about how to make them in the different code bases. So for us, obviously, we're R user group, we're going to be focusing on the R side of today. But if you are someone who uses different languages, it can be helpful for that as well. I'm going to be using sort of some data from the Star Wars data set, just because we usually use the MCARS one quite a lot. So I'm going to use the Star Wars one today. But I want to have a look at bar charts. So once I've gone through that decision tree, it will lead me to a separate website, because the Data to Viz is just sort of that front-facing, make a decision about what plot, and then it leads through to the R graph gallery, which then goes into a lot more detail about how to construct these with R. So and I'll just very quickly go back. Oh, not go back, close that, sorry. If I go to the Data to Viz, you'll see I get to that page by just going to that categoric and the bar plot. It'll give me a brief summary about what a bar plot is. It'll outline some common mistakes that people make with their bar plot, and then it'll let me choose, do I want to look at it from an R point of view, a Python point of view, or a JavaScript point of view? If I select R, that's where it's then gone to that R graph gallery. And so this then shows me a sort of gallery of different types of bar plots that I might be interested in sort of exploring or making. And it starts with sort of the most basic bar plot, and then it just starts adding different customizations. So it's not necessarily, oh, I want to make that one. It's going to show me exactly how to make that. This section, if I selected on it, is going to show me specifically how to have variable widths of my bars. And so it's sort of, if you're getting sort of started with R, and especially ggplot, because this is what these first sections are using, it's probably best to start in the top left and work your way through the different options. I can absolutely send the link. That's a good idea. There you go, darling. And so if I click on that most basic bar plot, it then goes into the instructions of making a most basic bar plot using the geom bar from ggplot. And it just gives me a very basic, here's how to make a very basic bar plot. Right. It then gives you some, here's how to control the color, and it just lets you explore this code and different ways to edit and how to sort of flip different aspects of your plots. And so you can sort of just work your way through, like I want to do custom colors or I want to do horizontal bar charts. There is often also more than just ggplot. So for R, I think we often find ourselves using ggplot quite a lot because it's so versatile, but the website actually does talk about different packages or different arguments to be able to make plots. And so this goes through examples of using the bar plot function in base R. So if there's for any reason you can't use ggplot or you don't want to use ggplot and you want to use base R, it also gives some instructions for doing that. Welcome, Cameron. Hello. So this was a basic plot that I made from that Star Wars data set. And so as you can see there, I've just done a very basic loading in diff.yr, loading in ggplot, and then I've looked at the species variable within Star Wars, which has created this bar chart of the various species and a count of those species. And so we can see, sorry, I'm still getting used to my quarto here and whether or not I can move around. Apparently I can't. But it's showing me the various species on the side from the data set and a bar to indicate the actual size or count of those. And so that was me using just that basic instructions to create that. I then had some questions around, well, how do I reorder these? Because the bar plot is obviously got the humans are the largest count in that Star Wars data set, and it's quite skewed. But what if I wanted to order these so that they're actually largest to smallest or smallest to largest? So I asked that question, and as a part of the actual documentation with the bar plot, there is even further guides down the bottom around those sorts of common questions. So let me just get back to that bar plot information that we were at. So I might have gone into sort of that most basic bar plot, or I flipped it with the horizontal. And so this was the one that I ended up looking at, where I was looking at that coordination flip to flip the bar plots. But as I went down, there's this sort of what's next with my bar plot. And it talks about, well, how do you reorder your plot? And so it sort of starts to lead you down those questions you're going to find yourself asking as well. And so I just followed this method one, which is using the forcats library, which basically uses a mutate and a factor reordering from that forcats library to be able to, so you can see here in my code, I've done a filter of the NA species, and then I've introduced that factor reorder on my species and account. And that's led to having that same bar plot, but reordered. And I've done this by just basically going, here's my data set, the Star Wars data set, and working my way through that data to the Viz website. This is basically talking points. I've just added these into the slideshow for anyone who comes back later, but there's very much the same sort of stuff that I've been talking about. The other part I like about the Data to Viz website is there are often code stories. So if you're someone who you've used R for a while, you've done visualization for a while, you might just use it as look at the gallery, make a decision, explore the code a little bit, and off you go. But for anyone who's sort of learning, there is often further galleries that you can sort of explore around making them even more advanced. There is also, in the Data to Viz website, there are often these stories as well, data stories that you can explore. And so, for instance, you're like, well, what are different ways I can look at numbers and categories? And these are basically data stories that someone has written and submitted of how they've visualized different types of information. So there's one here about how much do people tip? There's a question mark. So I could click on that and it basically documents how someone has visualized information about tipping data. And so they've talked about, well, they did a box plot and they've done a grouped box plot on this data. And they've sort of worked through their different thought process around creating these different visualizations based on that data. And so I find it quite useful if you're sort of someone who's just learning. The Data to Viz website can be very, very useful for just getting started with visualizations. Some other examples besides the bar charts that I looked at was box plots. So comparing the height distribution of species from the Star Wars plot. And so this wasn't the best representation. There's not enough data for the box plot, so it turns out it was the actually wrong type of visualization. But it was really easy because I've never done a box plot before. And so following that website's guidance, it was really quite easy just to go, oh, okay, it's 5 lines of code. Off I go and I've got a basic box plot that I could then go, yeah, either not enough data or it's the wrong plot for this data. Especially because there is one humongous outlier here, which is any points for anyone who can guess who the character is from Star Wars with the species of Mal Hutter. He was in the original series. It is Jabba the Hutt. Yes. Yeah. So he was the only of his species in this data set. And so there's a lot of those single lines where there's only one person from the species. So it can't do a box plot or a density on one person. But part of the joy of exploring. Dave's going to nerd out about that a little bit now. And then, yeah, so box plots, and this is all advice that comes from the website as well, but I've just pulled it in here into the quarto. But generally, you sort of need that 5-number summary for your box plot where it's got the different quartiles, the median, the maximum, the minimum. And this is all information that's on that website. It's really helpful as well to understand plots. If you're someone like me who is very visual and you might not understand the reasoning behind why to do plots, it's quite useful to just explore, well, why would I not use this plot, or why is this plot useful for this type of data? The third one I looked at was a density plot and visualizing the distribution of characters' ages, assuming that the ages were provided. This was another quite simple one that's, I guess, for me, a little bit better than a bar plot, because it's a little bit more visually pleasing. But again, very, very easy to sort of get up and running with a basic data set and creating a density plot. And yeah, 3 lines of code basically to get that graph. And even that I could have brought down a little bit because I played with the coloring just because I was having fun. But yeah, that's the Data to Viz website. I just wanted to sort of bring everyone's attention to that. We have also, this did start a discussion in our group because I was not aware that there was a similar site called, oh, Valentini, you might have to give me a code if you've got it quickly.
Data Viz Catalogue.
Thank you. This was one that Valentina finds useful as well, and is quite similar. It doesn't have that decision tree that I like and I find useful for myself when looking at, is it categorical, is it numbers, etc. That'll help me. This is basically just a gallery of a number of different types of visualizations. But it then attempts to do the same thing, where it will give you a brief introduction of the actual plot, and then here's some links, how to do it in R, how to do it in Python, etc. So for instance, the Box and Whisker plots, it'll give you that same sort of overview of what a Box and Whisker plot is. And then in the bottom right, various tools, and not just always coding tools. Sometimes there's also sort of some online, like Canvas or etc., but also like Excel. So it goes a little bit more beyond the coding and just using basic tools as well. Basic's not the right word, but it more often than not points to the exact same spot when it comes to R that the Data to Viz website is. It's just a different mask. So this one is still pointing to that R graph gallery. And that was everything I had. I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to that resource because I found it quite useful when I was getting started with R and visualization. Does anyone have any questions about the website or anything I've said? Oh, cool.
I do like that it kind of, the pathways thing that works for me. Decision tree sort of effectively, I've got a vague idea of what the message I'm trying to get across. I like it.
Yeah, that's what I found useful as well, David, because Valentina was like, why don't you use Data Viz Catalogue? I was like, oh, the decision tree works for how my brain works. Like I'm looking at a column of data and I need to visualize it, and I'm just thinking in the sense of my data. Yeah. Yeah, and I like that it, gives you that R or Python because I'm trying to bridge that gap between the two at the moment.
Yeah, that's particularly powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that was me and my spiel. I will stop the recording for that one and upload that.